When my husband picked up the microphone that night, I smiled. Everyone thought it would be a romantic toast. But then he laughed, looked at me, and said something that made the whole room freeze. She was never very useful, but at least she looked pretty today. Laughter echoed, glasses clinked. My mother lowered her head. And me? I kept smiling. Because at that exact moment, he still had no idea that that party wasn't the beginning of our future. It was the stage for his end, and everything was already in motion. I used to believe that love was made of concessions, that loving someone meant giving up parts of yourself, little by little, until it didn't hurt anymore. When I met my husband, I wasn't weak. I had dreams, plans, a voice that didn't tremble when I spoke. But nobody warned me that some people don't break you all at once. They do it in small doses, every day. At first, he praised me in public and corrected me at home. Then, he stopped praising me, and started correcting me even in front of others, always with a smile. "Relax, it's a joke," he would say, and I would laugh, because laughing seemed easier than explaining why it hurt. Over time, I became the understanding woman, the wife who doesn't create problems, the one who always understands, always gives in, always waits. When I quit my job to support him at the beginning of his career, he promised it was temporary. As soon as everything stabilizes, you can go back to doing it. What he loves, he said. But life never stabilized for me, only for him. While his success grew, my world shrank. My days began to revolve around his schedule, his needs, his mood. And without realizing it, I was disappearing. People started introducing me not by my name, but as his wife, and I accepted it, because in some strange way, that seemed to be all I deserved. I told myself that every marriage has its ups and downs, that nobody is perfect, that love requires patience. The problem is that I was being patient with someone who had no intention of changing. When he made a mistake, it was stress. When I made a mistake, it was incompetence. When he yelled, it was frankness. When I defended myself, it was drama. And so, respect was replaced by silence. Silence at the dinner table. Silence in the car. Silence within me. Until the idea of the wedding party came. He wanted something big, luxurious, full of important people. "It's a celebration of our history," he said. But deep down, I knew. It was a celebration of his image. I spent weeks helping with the preparations, choosing flowers he barely noticed, approving details he dismissed without a second thought. Whenever I suggested something, he replied, "You don't understand these things." And I swallowed hard. On the day of the party, while getting ready in front of the mirror, I had difficulty recognizing the woman reflected there. She looked beautiful, but she seemed distant. It was as if I were watching someone who had learned to smile, even when she was too tired to pretend. My mother entered the room and looked at me silently for a few seconds. Then she said, "You look beautiful." But there was something in her voice, something that sounded like a farewell. During the party, he circulated among the guests as if he were the star of a show, laughing loudly, hugging important people, receiving compliments. I walked behind, always one step behind, and nobody notices when a woman starts to feel small, because she's still there. She still smiles, she still plays the part, until someone decides to say aloud what she's spent years hearing in silence. When he picked up the microphone, the music stopped. The guests approached. Some raised their cell phones. I gripped my glass tightly. My heart was racing, but not with emotion. He started with jokes. Everyone laughed. Then he looked at me, and in that instant, something inside me knew. Before the words even left his mouth, I knew that this would be a point of no return. She was never very useful, but at least she looked pretty today. The laughter came loud, awkward, a few seconds too long. I felt the ground disappear, but I kept smiling, because sometimes a smile is the last thing left when everything inside you breaks. He raised his glass. He made a toast. and carried on as if nothing had happened. But inside me, something woke up. Something that had been dormant for years. Something that didn't cry, didn't scream, just watched. That night, while he celebrated, I understood something with frightening clarity. It wasn't love. It never was. And if he thought I was useless, it was because he never realized how much I had learned by silently observing. When the party ended and the lights went out, I lay down beside him without saying a word. He slept peacefully, convinced that he had put me in my place. But as I stared at the ceiling, I made the first promise to myself in many years. It wouldn't end like that. Because from that moment on, I was no longer the invisible woman. I was the woman who began to plan. The next morning, I would discover something that would prove that humiliation wasn't a mistake. It was a habit. The morning after the party, I woke up before him. It wasn't insomnia. It was clarity. I was strangely calm, as if something inside me had finally organized itself. He slept beside me with the tranquility of someone who had never needed to apologize for anything. Heavy breathing, relaxed face. I observed that man for a few seconds and thought about how many times I had apologized, for things that were never my fault. I got up slowly and went to the kitchen. The house still smelled of the party from the night before. Wilting flowers, forgotten glasses, remains of a celebration that now seemed fake to me. While the coffee was brewing, my cell phone vibrated. It was a message from a number I hadn't saved. "Sorry for witnessing that yesterday. You didn't deserve it." I stared at the screen for a few seconds, trying to understand. Before I could reply, another message arrived. "Does he always talk about you like that?" My stomach churned. I simply replied, "Like what?" The answer took a while, long enough for the coffee to get cold. "Like you're a burden." A burden. The word kept echoing in my head. That person, someone I barely knew, had seen in minutes what I'd taken years to try to justify. I put my phone away when I heard footsteps in the hallway. He appeared in the kitchen as if nothing had happened. He picked up a cup. He sat down at the table. "You were quiet yesterday," he commented, without looking at me. "I was tired," I replied. He shrugged. "Don't take things so seriously." And there it was again, the phrase that always ended any conversation, any attempt of mine to exist. That day I decided not to confront, not to question, not to ask for respect. I decided to observe. I started paying attention to details I had previously ignored. The way he always placed his phone face down, how he would leave the house to take care of quick things and take hours, how he spoke to me one way, and to other people in a completely different way. At night, while he was showering, his phone vibrated on the table. A notification appeared on the screen. It wasn't a contact's name. It was just an initial, a single letter. My heart raced, but I didn't touch the device. Not yet. I needed to be sure I wasn't imagining things. That's how it always started, me doubting myself. In the following days, I began mentally noting schedules, mood swings, small inconsistencies. He started treating me better. That should have reassured me. But instead, it put me on alert. Because he was only kind when he felt safe. And at that moment, something had changed. One afternoon, while I was organising old documents, I found a folder I'd never seen before. It wasn't hidden, but it wasn't where it should be either. Inside, bills, statements, late payments, amounts that didn't make sense with the lifestyle he insisted on displaying. I felt a chill run down my spine. He always said he took care of everything, that I didn't need to worry. "These things confuse you," he'd say. And maybe that's exactly what he wanted. I kept searching, more papers, more numbers, until I found a receipt folded in half. The address wasn't ours. I sat on the floor for a few minutes, staring at that paper as if it could explain everything to me on its own. That night he arrived late. When I asked where he'd been, he answered too quickly. "Meeting." No meeting smelled of that perfume. But I didn't say anything. I smiled. I prepared dinner. I asked how his day was, because at that moment I understood something essential. He believed I was incapable of noticing, and that belief was his greatest weakness. Before going to sleep, I received another message from the unknown number. I thought a lot about whether I should tell you this. But he's not who you think he is. My finger hovered over the screen. The room was dark. He was already asleep. And I felt, with a silent certainty, that this message was the door I had been avoiding opening. I took a deep breath and replied, "What do you mean by that?" The answer came seconds later. "Are you sure you want to know?" At that moment, I still believed I was about to discover a betrayal. I didn't imagine the truth was much worse. It took me a few seconds to reply, not because I was afraid of the truth, but because, for the first time, I felt I could no longer pretend I didn't see. "I'm sure," I sent. The phone vibrated almost immediately. He's not just arrogant. He's careful, caring. The word sent a strange shiver down my spine. "Did you notice how he always talks about you like he's joking? That's not humour. It's practice. I read that sentence several times. Practice. For what?" The next message came in parts, as if the person on the other end was carefully choosing each word. "He's been doing this for years. With different people. Always the same way." My heart started beating faster. He gets close. He charms. Then he starts to fade. It was like hearing someone describe my life, without ever having been inside it. I got out of bed and went to the living room, so as not to wake him. I sat on the sofa in the dark, my cell phone illuminating my face. "Who are you?" I asked. The answer took longer than I expected. "Someone who has been where you are now." I felt a lump forming in my throat. He never raises his voice at first. He makes it seem like the problem is always you, and when you start to doubt yourself, he's already won. I closed my eyes. The memories began to fit together with painful precision. The times I apologized without knowing why. The times I felt ashamed to speak in public. The times I thought I was exaggerating. Everything had a pattern. Do you know how many women he's made feel like this? My finger trembled on the screen. How many? The answer came short. More than you imagine. That sentence weighed more than any number. He never leaves visible marks. He leaves doubts. And that's when I understood. It wasn't just about betrayal, nor about isolated disrespect. It was a method, a calculated way to erase someone without anyone noticing. "You're not useless. You've just been convinced of it." I felt tears welling up, but I didn't make a sound. Crying silently had become a habit. "And do you know why he called you useless in public?" the next message asked. "Because he felt you were drifting away." My chest tightened. Men like him need an audience. They need to reaffirm control. I looked at the room. He was sleeping soundly. So peaceful, like someone who never fears being discovered. "I'm not telling you this to scare you. I'm telling you because, when you start to see, he starts to make mistakes. Mistakes. For the first time, that word didn't seem impossible. "What do I do?" I asked. The answer didn't come immediately. Minutes passed. I almost thought the conversation was over. Then my cell phone vibrated. "You observe, you record, and you don't confront." I swallowed hard. Because the biggest mistake you can make, it's to let him know you're awake. That phrase stuck with me. Before I could reply, the last message arrived. And when he realizes he's lost control, he'll try something desperate. I felt a chill run through my body. Something that could hurt you. I put my phone on the table and sat there in the dark, trying to breathe. Everything made sense now. The party, the humiliation, the confident tone. He didn't despise me because he thought I was useless. He despised me because he was afraid of what I could become, if I ever remembered. I carefully went back to bed. I lay down beside him. I watched his face for a few seconds, and that night, For the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt alert, because now I knew he didn't underestimate me by accident. He needed it. And I also knew something else, something that kept me awake until dawn. If I was right, the next move wouldn't be mine. That week, he made a small mistake, but too serious to ignore. His mistake wasn't big. It wasn't noisy. And, precisely because of that, it was definitive. It all started with a delay. That Tuesday, he said he would arrive early. He spoke with the nonchalance of someone who knows no one will question him. I nodded. I smiled. I wished him good luck. And I watched. The hours passed. The dinner grew cold on the table. The clock ticked too slowly. When he finally came home, it was already past 10. "Problems at work," he said, dropping his keys on the counter. I didn't answer immediately. "Did you eat?" I asked. He hesitated for a second. I ate something quick. A lie. I knew because the smell of his cologne was still there, stronger than before. But that wasn't what caught my attention. When he took off his jacket, something fell out of his inside pocket. A small folded piece of paper. He bent down too quickly to pick it up. Quick as someone who knows they've let something slip. But I was faster. I grabbed it before him. It was a receipt. Not from a restaurant. Not from a parking lot. It was from a hotel. A hotel a few kilometers from home. The name was there. Date. Time. The world seemed to shrink around me. He tried to laugh. That? Long meeting. I had to rest a bit. Rest. I watched his face as he spoke. The light tone. The forced smile. It was the first time I saw the mechanism behind the mask. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I didn't question. I handed the paper back. "I understand," I said. And in that instant, something changed in his eyes. Because he expected resistance. He expected emotion. And I offered silence. That night, I waited for him to fall asleep. When I was sure he was in a deep sleep, I got up. I went to the office. I opened the folder of documents I had found days before. This time, I searched with a different perspective. Addresses, dates, repeated names. The hotel appeared more than once. My stomach churned. I grabbed my phone and started photographing everything, every piece of paper, every detail. Not out of anger, but for clarity. The next morning, while he was showering, his phone vibrated. The name appeared this time. It wasn't just an initial, it was a full name, a name I recognized, someone from his social circle, someone who had already been to our house. My heart raced, but my hands were steady. I didn't unlock my phone, not yet. Because now I understood something important. I didn't need to know everything. I needed to know enough. In the following days, he began to change. He started asking where I was going, who I was talking to, how long I was away. He disguised it as care. But it wasn't. It was surveillance. He felt that something had gotten out of control, and that made him nervous. One night, while we were having dinner, he casually commented, "You've been acting differently." "Different how?" I asked. "Quieter." I smiled. "Maybe I'm learning to listen." He stared at me for a few seconds, and I saw it. I saw the discomfort. Because men like him can't stand the silence of someone observing. Before going to sleep, I received a new message from an unknown number. He already realised. I swallowed hard. "Realised what?" I replied. The answer came quickly. That you don't react anymore. And that scares him. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about the receipt, the documents, the name on the phone screen. Everything was falling into place. But something was still missing. Something that would prove to me, without a doubt, that this wasn't just betrayal. Because the feeling in my chest said otherwise. The next morning, he left early. He forgot his laptop at home. It wasn't a common oversight. It was haste. I stood there for a few minutes, staring at the object on the table. I knew that would be a limit. If I crossed it, there would be no going back. I took a deep breath. I opened the laptop. What I found there wasn't just proof. It was a plan. I stood in front of the laptop for a few seconds, not out of doubt. But because deep down, I already knew. I sat down slowly and opened the screen. The computer asked for a password. I stared at the keyboard for a moment, thinking about how many times I'd seen him type it without bothering to hide it. I tried his birthday. Nothing. I tried the name of his childhood dog. Nothing. I took a deep breath and typed my own name. The screen unlocked. I felt a chill run through my body. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was control. Inside the laptop, everything was too organised. Folders named by dates, files hidden inside other files. I started with the emails. There were conversations I'd never seen before. They weren't just romantic messages. They were negotiations, transfers, agreements, conversations about money. I read a sentence that made me swallow hard. She doesn't understand these things. She signs what I tell her to. My name appeared there, not as a wife, as an obstacle. I kept reading. I discovered that he had opened accounts in my name, taken out loans without my knowledge, used my signature on documents I never remembered signing. With each click, the feeling of betrayal transformed into something colder, something calculated. It wasn't just infidelity. It was a plan years in the making. There was a file called Contingency. I opened it. It was a kind of roadmap, detailed steps, deadlines, simulations. The scenario was clear. If something went wrong, if he were discovered, I would be held responsible. My body felt heavy. It described how he intended to prove I was unstable, how he would distance me financially, how he would justify decisions made in my name. My heart was pounding so hard I was afraid to make a sound. I closed the laptop for a moment. I breathed. I didn't cry. Because at that moment, something inside me reorganised itself. I wasn't dealing with a cruel husband. I was dealing with someone dangerous. I opened the computer again. I photographed everything. I sent copies to an email I had created days before. Silently. I deleted the history. I closed the folders. Everything needed to appear untouched. When I heard the front door open, I was already sitting on the sofa. He came in smiling. "Quiet day?" he asked. "Quiet," I replied. He didn't notice my trembling hands. He didn't notice my more attentive gaze, because he still believed the same thing as always, that I wasn't capable. That night he was kind. Too kind. He asked questions. He prepared dinner. He said he loved me. Every gesture seemed rehearsed, and I understood. He sensed that something had gone wrong, but he still didn't know what. Before going to sleep, I received a message from an unknown number. "Have you seen it?" My heart raced. "I have," I replied. The answer came almost instantly. "So now you know." I closed my eyes. Yes, I knew. I knew I couldn't act impulsively anymore. I knew confronting him would be a mistake. I knew that from that moment on, every step would need to be calculated. Because if he found out I knew, I would become part of his plan. I lay beside him that night with a terrifying certainty. The man who called me useless in public had built his entire life on the certainty that I would never react. And maybe that had been the biggest mistake of his life. The following week, I did something that seemed small, but it was the first step to turning the tables. The first step wasn't grand. It didn't involve confrontations, nor revelations. It was almost invisible. The next morning, I woke up before him, as I had been doing for days. I made coffee. I tidied the house. I did everything exactly as I always did. Because people like him trust what is predictable. When he left for work, I waited a few minutes. I grabbed my bag and went to a place he would never imagine I would go alone. The bank, not our usual bank, another one. I went in as if I were resolving something simple. The teller smiled, asked for my documents. I explained calmly that I needed to verify some information. And there, sitting in that cold chair, I heard for the first time something that changed everything. I wasn't wrong. Nor confused, nor exaggerating. There were accounts in my name that I had never authorised, transactions I never made, signatures that weren't mine. The teller spoke, and each word was like a piece falling into place. I left with copies, dates, protocols. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was proof. In the following days, I started making small changes. I went back to studying something I had abandoned years before, without telling anyone. I opened a new email, a new phone number, an account only I knew about. He noticed, but didn't understand. "You've been busy," he commented one night. "Yeah," I replied. "I decided to take care of myself." He laughed. "Since when?" I smiled. "Since now." It was the first time it didn't sound like an excuse. His reaction was subtle. He started calling me more, asking where I was, getting irritated when I took too long to reply. And there was the pattern again. When he lost control, he called it concern. One afternoon, I ran into the person who had been messaging me by chance. It wasn't planned. It wasn't announced. She recognized me before I could pretend I didn't see her. Her gaze was the same one I'd seen in the mirror, months ago. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. She just said something that stuck with me. He always thinks he's one step ahead. He never notices when someone learns the way. I went home certain that I wasn't alone. That night, he arrived early. He sat next to me on the sofa. He held my hand. "You know I do everything for us, right?" I looked at him, and for the first time I saw fear, not explicit, but present. "I know," I replied, and in that instant, he believed he still had control. What he didn't know was that every answer of mine, every silence, every smile, was already part of something bigger. Before going to sleep, I received a message. "He's going to test you." I took a deep breath. I was already expecting this, because when someone starts to stray from the role they've been given, the manipulator tries to tighten the screws, and I knew the test was coming. The next day, he made an unexpected proposal, and I understood that he was ready to risk everything. He made the proposal during dinner. It wasn't sudden. It was carefully rehearsed. He spoke while stirring the food on his plate, as if it were something simple. I was thinking, maybe it would be better if we organised our finances. I slowly raised my eyes. "Organise how?" I asked. "Put everything under my control," he replied. "That way you don't have to worry about these things." There it was. The same old speech, but with urgency. I smiled slightly. "Why now?" He shrugged. "Planning." But I saw what he didn't want to show. Anxiety. He spread some papers on the table. Contracts, authorizations, documents I recognized and others I didn't. "Just sign," he said. "Quick thing." I took the papers. I read every line, too slowly for his liking. "You always trust me," he commented, trying to sound light-hearted. I looked up. Trust is also about reading. The silence between us stretched for long seconds. He smiled, but it was a different smile. Tense. "You've been acting strange," he said. "Are you sure you're okay?" There was the test, to question my stability, to make it seem like the problem was with me. I took a deep breath. "I'm fine," I replied. "I just want to understand." He leaned forward. "You don't need to understand everything." It was at that moment that I realised he wasn't asking, he was pressuring. I put the papers back on the table. "I'll think about it," I said. His face hardened for a second, too quickly for someone who wasn't paying attention. "Think about what?" he asked. "About us," I replied. He stood up abruptly. "You always complicate things." I watched as he walked across the room. "I do everything for you," he continued, "and you're suspicious." There it was again. The reversal. Calm, I thought. Very calm. "It's not distrust," I said. "It's care." He stopped. He turned slowly. For a moment, I saw anger. Raw anger, but it quickly vanished, replaced by a sweet tone. "Sorry," he said. "I'm stressed. He came closer and hugged me, and I realised something that chilled me to the bone. The hug wasn't affection, it was restraint. That night he didn't fall asleep immediately. He was restless. He got up a few times, he checked his phone, and I knew. He was recalculating. The next morning, I found something different on the breakfast table. My phone, in the middle of the table. He never touched my phone. Never. Forgot to charge it yesterday, he said casually. I picked up the phone. He had been using it. No confirmation was needed. I could feel it. The test had escalated. Before leaving, he said something that sounded like a warning. Relationships without trust don't work. I smiled. I agree. The door closed, and I stood there, feeling the weight of it all. He was losing control. And men like that don't accept losing. I picked up my phone. There was an unread message. He tried. I swallowed hard. He'll try again. I looked out the window. His car had already disappeared, and for the first time since the beginning of everything, I felt fear, not of losing him, but of what he might do when he realised that I wasn't going to give in anymore. That same week, something happened, and I understood that the game had become too dangerous. What happened that week wasn't a scandal. It was something small, almost invisible, but it was enough for me to understand that he was willing to go too far. It all started with a phone call. I was at home when my cell phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. On the other end, a formal voice introduced itself as a representative of a financial institution. It said my full name, my CPF, Brazilian tax identification number, my address. Each correct piece of information made my stomach sink a little more. We are contacting you to confirm an outstanding issue, the voice explained. Outstanding issue, the word echoed. What outstanding issue? I asked. There was a pause. A recent credit application in your name. I felt the ground disappear beneath me. I didn't apply for anything, I replied. Another pause. It shows digital authorization. I hung up with cold hands. He had tried again, without warning me, without asking me, without preparing me. But this time, he had made a mistake. Because now, there was official evidence. I gathered all the documents I had been collecting. I organised dates, times, proofs. The pattern was too clear to be a coincidence. That night, we went to dinner with friends. I almost didn't want to go, but something inside me told me I needed to observe. He was too confident. He spoke loudly, he laughed, he interrupted. At one point, someone commented, "You two look very good." He replied quickly, "She depends on me a lot." The sentence landed heavily on the table. Some laughed, others looked away. I smiled, but this time, not out of habit. I smiled because I realised something. He could no longer control himself in public. He was exaggerating, trying to reaffirm something that already felt slipping through his fingers. One of the women at the table gave me a quick glance. It wasn't pity, it was recognition. On the way home, he was irritated. "You were acting strange today," he commented. "Again?" I asked. "You exposed me," he said. Exposed. I remained silent. "You didn't defend me," he continued. I took a deep breath. "From what?" He didn't answer. Because there was no answer that wouldn't reveal everything. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about the phone call, the dinner, his expression. Everything pointed to the same thing. He was speeding up. And when someone speeds up, they mess up. The next morning, I went to a place I had been avoiding. A police station. Not to report. Not yet. But to ask questions. To understand. To get information. I left there with something he would never have expected. Clarity. Now I knew exactly what a crime was, what abuse was, and what needed to be done. Before going home, I received a message. He talked too much yesterday. I closed my eyes. Yes, he had talked, and there were witnesses. When I arrived, he was on the phone. He stopped talking as soon as he saw me. He forced a smile. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Everything's fine," I replied. But for the first time, I felt something different from fear. I felt focus, because now I understood. It wasn't about surviving anymore. It was about ending it. 2 days later, someone knocked on the door, and he wasn't prepared for who it was. The knock on the door came too early. I was still in the kitchen when I heard it. It wasn't loud, it wasn't aggressive, but it had authority. He appeared in the hallway with a closed face. "Are you expecting someone?" he asked. "No," I replied. He opened the door. 2 men were outside, polite, formal. They introduced themselves as representatives of a financial institution. Their tone was neutral, but their words weren't. "We need to clarify some inconsistencies," they said. He tried to smile. There must be some mistake. But the smile didn't last. They cited amounts, dates, authorizations, all in my name. I watched as his body reacted before his mind, tense jaw, rigid hands. "Can we come in?" they asked. There was a second of hesitation, a second that had never existed before. He gave in. They sat down at the table. They asked questions. He answered too quickly. I remained silent, because now the silence worked in my favor. When one of them asked if I recognized those movements, I said only, "No." One word, clear, enough. They wrote it down. They stood up. Before leaving, one of them said something that made the air heavy. This type of situation usually evolves into other instances. Instances. The word hung in the air. When the door closed, he turned to me. "Why did you do that?" he asked. There was no scream. There was fear. "Did what?" I replied. He ran his hand through his hair. "You know." I stared at him, and for the first time, I didn't look away. "I told the truth," I said. The silence that followed was unlike any other. It was a silence with no turning back. That day he left home without saying where he was going. Hours later, I received a message. "He's trying to protect himself." I wasn't surprised. That night when he returned, he didn't speak to me. He stayed on his phone, typing, deleting, like someone trying to plug a leak with their hands. In the following days, something began to change. Unanswered phone calls, cancelled meetings, invitations that disappeared. A mutual friend called me. "Is everything all right with you both?" she asked. "Why?" I replied. She hesitated. "He's been different." Different. That's how it started. His image was cracking. At a family gathering, he tried to joke. No one laughed. He noticed. I noticed. And, for the first time, he also realized that I noticed. That night, he tried to talk. "We need to get some things straightened out," he said. "Straightened or fixed?" I asked. He sighed. "You're exaggerating." He still tried. But the sentence sounded empty, because now there were witnesses. Before going to sleep, I received one last message. "He's lost support." I looked at the ceiling. Yes, the doors were closing, and I knew, when external control starts to fail, people like him resort to the last option: despair. That night, he did something I never imagined, and I understood that I needed to leave home. He didn't raise his voice, and that's what scared me the most. After dinner, he closed the curtains. He locked the door. He turned off the living room lights. Everything seemed calculated. "We need to talk," he said. His tone was too calm. I sat on the sofa, keeping my distance. He began to speak as if he were explaining something simple. He said there had been misunderstandings, that everything had been done for our own good, that I was being influenced by outsiders. "You're not thinking clearly," he stated. There it was again. The attempt to convince me that the problem was me. I stood up slowly. "I know exactly what I'm thinking." He smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "You're tired," he said. "Let's sleep and we'll talk tomorrow." He moved closer. Instinctively, I took a step back. It was small, but he noticed. The silence that followed was heavy. "Are you afraid of me?" he asked. I looked at him. "Yes," I replied. The word hung in the air. It was at that moment that something changed. There was no explosion. There was coldness. "You're dramatizing," he said. "This isn't going to end well for you." It wasn't a direct threat, but it was enough. My whole body went on alert. I needed to leave. "I'm going for a walk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He chuckled briefly. "Now?" "Now." I grabbed my bag. He didn't try to stop me, and that was the strangest thing. He opened the door and said, "We'll talk later." I went downstairs with my heart racing. When I got in the car, my hands were shaking so much I almost dropped the keys. I drove aimlessly for a few minutes, breathing, trying to understand. Then I parked. I picked up my phone. There were several unread messages. "You need to get out of there. Now." I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. "Can you see me?" I asked. I didn't need to explain. "Yes," the voice replied. "Come." I packed a few things the next day when he wasn't home. Little, essential. Nothing that would betray that I didn't intend to come back. When I left, I looked at the house one last time. There I had shrunk. There I had learned to be silent. But there too, I had woken up. I closed the door, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. But I knew that wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of the confrontation he had been avoiding. 2 days later, he tried to contact me, and this time it wasn't to apologize. The next 2 days were strangely silent. No messages, no calls. The silence wasn't peace. It was calculation. I was staying at the house of someone who knew me before I was little. I slept little. I thought a lot. But for the first time in years, no one told me how I should feel. On the 3rd day, the phone rang. His number. I knew that call wasn't an apology. I answered. "You need to come back," he said without introduction. "No," I replied. There was a short pause. "That's not an option," he continued. "The house is ours. The bills are ours. You can't just disappear." There he was again, speaking as if he still had authority. "I can," I replied, "and I will." His breathing changed on the other end of the line. "You're making a mistake," he said. "You're exposing yourself. Exposing yourself." I almost laughed. "You've done that for me before," I said. "In public." He hung up. That night I received the first strange notification. My name in an email I didn't recognize. A long text, full of innuendo. It said I was unstable, that I needed help, that he was worried. It was the plan in action. In the following days this repeated itself. Indirect messages, comments reaching me through third parties. Questions disguised as concern. "Are you okay? He seems so worried about you. He said you've been acting differently." Different. Yes, I was, but not in the way he described. He wanted to plant doubt, create a narrative. Because men like him don't lose without trying to destroy the reputation of whoever dared to leave. But there was something he didn't know. While he tried to control his version of the story, I was organizing the facts, documents, records, protocols, everything in order. I received an informal summons, nothing official yet, but close enough to make him panic. He called me that same night, this time crying, really crying. "I could lose everything," he said. "Do you want that?" I closed my eyes. How many times had I lost everything, without him even noticing? "I just want peace," I replied. "Then come back," he begged. There was the final trap, because if I came back, he could say it had all been an exaggeration, that I had given up on my own story. "No," I said. The silence on the other end was different. Cold. "You don't know who you're messing with," he said. It wasn't a direct threat, but it was clear. I hung up. And for the first time, I felt something curious. Not fear. Determination. The following week, Something unexpected happened. Someone contacted me. Another woman, another story, another pattern, the pieces connected. It wasn't just about me, it never was. What he did, he repeated. And now, it wasn't just an isolated voice anymore. There were many. That night, I sat alone and thought about the party, the microphone, the laughter, the public humiliation. He had used a stage to belittle me, and I understood, with an almost cruel clarity. The ending also needed a stage. Not for revenge, but for truth, because silence protects abusers. And I had been silent for too long. When I turned off the bedside lamp, a message appeared on the screen. He no longer controls the narrative. I took a deep breath. The end was near, and he still didn't know that everything he built to destroy me would be used to reveal who he really was. On the day they all gathered again, he thought he would have the last word. The day everyone gathered again didn't seem special. There was no party, no music, no flowers. It was a formal meeting, a neutral setting, people seated around a table, and yet that was the stage. He entered confidently. Well-dressed, upright posture, the same man who always knew how to occupy space. When he saw me, he smiled as if everything was still under control. He sat down. He crossed his hands. He waited. He truly believed he would have the last word. The conversation began technically. Numbers, dates, protocols. He answered confidently until the right questions began. One account, then another, then a third. Silence. For the first time, he didn't have quick answers. When they asked for the original documents, he looked at me. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. There. There was no more arrogance. There was panic. I placed the folder on the table. I didn't slam it. I didn't throw it. I just opened it. Inside were all the proofs, organized, chronological, everything I had gathered in silence, while he believed I wasn't capable. One of the people at the table started reading. Another asked for copies. No one raised their voice, and that's exactly what made everything heavier. He tried to interrupt. He tried to explain. He tried to relativize, but no one listened to him anymore. Because when the truth is clear, it doesn't need defending. At a certain point, someone asked, "Why wasn't this communicated before?" I looked at him. Then I answered, "Because I was afraid." There was no judgment in that room. There was understanding, and for the first time, I felt something I had never felt beside him, validation. He stood up. He said it was all an exaggeration, that I was misinterpreting things, that I was too emotional. But the sentence fell flat, without force, without an audience, because now he was no longer controlling the narrative. When the meeting ended, he left without looking back. Alone. No hug, no support, no outstretched hand. Days later, the consequences came. Not as a scandal, not as public humiliation. They came as a loss of credibility, of opportunities, of space. People began to distance themselves, in the most painful way possible. In silence. He tried to call me again. I didn't answer, because some conversations don't deserve to continue. Months passed. I went back to work. I went back to studying. I went back to occupying space with my own name. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone, because the greatest proof was internal. One night, I found a photo from the party, the one where he was holding the microphone, and I was smiling. I looked at it for a few seconds, and then I understood something that brought me peace. That woman wasn't weak. She was surviving. Today, when I think of him, I don't feel anger. I feel distance. And that is freedom. Because the man who called me useless in public was defeated by the very thing he always underestimated: my silence, my patience, and my clarity. And if there's one thing I learned from all this, it's simple. Never underestimate someone who is silent. They may just be preparing themselves. If this story touched you in any way, know this: you are not alone, and no one has the right to diminish who you are. Thank you for listening to the end.